chapter are you?
Oh, we've been thinking a little bit about
Chapter 11.
11, which is Vishvarupa.
Okay.
And,
Did you have that in your versions of translation here?
no,
Not here.
I translated it, but I don't
It's,
have it.
it's in my thing.
Yeah. And
Wait a minute.
no, I'd like, no.
You want to do it?
We can do it tonight. Let's see.
You have 11 here.
Oh, did we give you 11?
Yeah.
Okay.
Kindness for me, blah, blah.
Yeah. Okay.
I can't see.
Yeah. Put on your glasses.
Arjuna said.
That's my role up here.
Chapter 11.
Oh, really? Oh, that was part of that one. Oh, that. Okay. Let's see if I have that.
The greatest secret, known as the primordial being, was spoken by you.
Okay.
Oh. It's the karma. I just got blasted by the same thing I typed.
Oh. I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry.
What happened?
He got blasted.
He got blasted through his earphones with the same.
Oh,
He's saying it's instant karma.
that is.
Let's see, this is it.
So when Bob was talking this afternoon, he posed the question about how Arjuna got out of the
Oh, yes.
eye,
Right, after
the
the
divine
big vision,
eye.
yes.
So that's part of where we're going to start
Good
tonight.
idea, great.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
And the divine eye goes into the life.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, that's a good thing. We gotta come back to that. Bring it
But,
back. Oh. So,
So that was chapter 11, right? Yes.
chapter 11.
But you can start early, or you just do the whole chapter and start early. You don't have to just go on to that one.
Oh, yeah,
Right.
that's.
And what leads up to chapter 11 a little bit.
Okay, yeah. What leads
But
up
we
to
don't
chapter-
have to do it verse by verse, but just tell him.
Yeah. Shall we begin?
Please, please.
Okay, let's see. So, we have, so Arjuna has been, asking questions, has been confused. And he, has learned about the processes of yoga. He's learned about all these different schools of non-dualism, dualism, karma yoga, orthodox karma practice, sacrifice practice. And, and all of these schools really contain each other. So any good school contains all the other schools. And it's just a matter of what's up at the present moment as to really what needs to be done. But then what happens after that is something I find interesting is that Krishna, who comes off culturally as he's the Paramatman, or the supreme self, or the Supreme Consciousness. Remember, self, there's no self in the self. It's a selfless self, or no separate thing you can ever, yeah, I got it. Okay. But it's just, all people, they tend to become what we call very theistic about it, or dualistic. There's somebody, or it's either me or it's somebody else out there who's the great boss, and it's just a matter of like being good and seeing that. And, and so what happens that I find interesting is after like chapter 6, Krishna starts to take this apart for Arjuna by, in a sense, coming down off of the pedestal that Arjuna's mind and our minds have placed reality on, as the supreme boss, almost, at times a dictator, at times very frightening. And so Krishna, who is actually the beloved, the you of you, and if you know what I mean, does something very brilliant that the Gita does, and he comes down off this pedestal and says, oh, here's something that, in your direct experience, part of the, ordinary life in the world, this is me. There's me, there. I am, I am the taste of water. I am the light, the sun. And he goes through all of these things, and he, goes through, and even through the mythology of the age, you'll say of all of the Nagas, who are the divine water serpents, says, I am Ananta, and that's Vishnu's totally subservient, brilliant serpent Sofa, who loves supporting all beings, who's extremely selfless as being goes.
Yeah.
And he says, that's me, and he's pointing out all of these things, and gradually, Arjuna starts to learn about, that bhakti, or love, or relationship with all beings, is really the highest joy. And, not getting some preconception of nirvana or some kind of liberation. Because once you get a taste for this bhakti, or this love, you're not that interested in, the state that you have achieved. In fact, you're just like, doesn't matter to me, this is kind of interesting right here.
And in the beginning, as Krishna is laying out all of these theories about the different types of philosophical stances, he comes across as, the authority in a way and the teacher, because in a sense, that's what Arjuna is able to respond to, because he's reading Arjuna and knowing that's what he can respond to. And then by just before this 11th chapter, he's softened, and he said, and Arjuna's beginning to see they have relationship, like true relationship.
Okay.
And that's when he starts to say the simple things, like, I am the taste of water, which makes it so real, something that the reader themselves can relate to. And then, so it's like he can't just go into his divine forms, which we'll talk about in a minute, that can be terrifying, because he's kind of slowly guiding Arjuna there.
Yeah, and so at the end of the 10th chapter, just before that, he is talking about his daivi form, that all of these things that are part of common experience, these are my divine forms. And he's listed all of these, both mythological and
theism,
and then he says, but they're infinite. There's just no end to any of these. And just know that any of these, all of these within any form, everything is there. But any form is just a small little speck of the infinity. Any of these forms which contain all other forms is just a tiny little speck. And so Arjuna is like, basically that I got it, which is always a, watch out whenever you say I got it. And so he starts chapter 11, and he says, basically, you have shown me the greatest secret of all secrets, which is the secret of, that love is what makes the world go round, basically. And you've done it out of kindness, and I've heard about you, about, the impermanence, so the birth of all beings, the disappearance of all beings. And then he has a request. This is why this chapter is so famous. I want to, and he says, as you have described yourself, and all of a sudden he's clicked back into, ultimate Lord, so he's looking at it, I got the big one, okay. I want to see your divine forms. What's called the Vishvarupa, which means the forms of the actual world, okay. But somehow we think, I'm going to see, the higher and higher and higher realms, and I want to see it. And so he said, if you think I can do it, if you think it can be seen by me, then please show it to me. And so basically the answer was, with your ordinary eyes, you can't see this, so I have to give you the divine eye. And so, so he does. And I don't know what form that was, like that. And then the 5th verse is where it starts to get interesting. And he says, just look. Okay, so this is like, just look. Meaning, it's like an instruction that you would give somebody in a yoga class. Just look. Which would also include just listen, just feel, but just look at my forms. Hundreds of them, thousands of them, all types and varieties, all colors, all shapes. Okay, so there's, which is pretty much, have you ever noticed throughout the day that there are lots of different forms and things you ever see? Okay, but we don't actually see them, because we're so busy wandering, lost in thought, that we don't really get to experience that. And so then, he says, and he shows him, all of these gods and special beings and powerful beings. And so then it goes back to the commentator, Sanjaya. So remember, all of this is a story being told by the psychic secretary of the blind king, Dhritarashtra. And so Sanjaya said, and he's talking to the blind king, "Oh, blind king." And so he gave him so he got his eyes, so the king is blind, and then Arjuna is getting the special eyes. Okay. And so the little joke there. Okay. And so Hari, the master of yoga, showed Arjuna the supreme glorious form. And not of one, but of many mouths and eyes, many wondrous visions, many divine ornaments, many raised divine weapons, wearing divine garlands, and apparel with divine fragrances and ointments, and composed of all wonders, the Lord infinite with faces turned everywhere. And then, very famous verse, if 1,000 suns were to arise simultaneously in the sky, such a brilliance might be the splendor of this great being. That was very bright. We'll finish Sanjaya's things. And so then the Pandava saw in the body of the God of gods the whole world with its countless divisions as one. Then the winner of wealth, so they always give Arjuna a different name all the time. And so what's his wealth? Yeah, Dhananjaya. What his, at this point, wealth doesn't make you happy. And Arjuna said that in the very early part of the book. Even if I got a big kingdom, what's the point? It's not going to last, and all my friends are dying. And so he saw all of this in the body. And so at this point, as a yogi, we say, well, where's the actual body in the practical conversation here? And you might be riding around currently in what Krishna later calls a yantra, which is a body. And you're riding around in it. And by the way, it's not your body, though it's like a rental. Because it's going to be repossessed, sooner than you would like. And so this actually, and then we've also just gone through all these chapters of presenting, ordinary things in nature. And Krishna says, this is my divine form. Well, look at this. This is me. This is me. And he also goes through the mind, and all of these different qualities of the mind. You say, oh, that's me. That's me. Not that this comes from me, but it is me. And so it's in. So if you want to see this form, you could see it in the body. Okay. And so even if I, misinterpret this and say, oh, my body is the body of Krishna, then my ego goes, yes, too bad about your body. And this is like the yogi really gone bad, again and again. But in fact, every being has to look, through the sense perceptions that they're having in order to see this Vishvarupa that Arjuna thinks is so special. And so it's basically through your own senses. So you go into the body, and this is where this is implying an esoteric yoga experience.
And this is what we've been practicing in the chanting when we've been going through the different forms of prana as well, because you may relate to one of the 5 forms we've been talking about more vividly, with extreme visceral sense of bubbles all over the skin and all over your whole body, or the prana or whatever. And they are methods for getting into this very experience. And so on one level, you have to keep going back and forth between here's the theory, here's what we're trying to get you to understand, and then just some trick or practice or something that gets you out of your conclusions enough to have the intuitive sense of things. And so that's a pattern again and again in all of these teachings. And that's what's such a nice parallel between what Bob did this afternoon and here is, and you mentioning this afternoon that love is the unity of experience. That's one of the definitions of it. And that's exactly what this is. It's like the unity where you have disappeared. But again, instantly, as soon as you say it, you go, okay, I got it. And then you've reappeared. And there you go.
Off
again. So he's gone through some basic levels and then he goes into deeper.
And so some people have compared this experience to experiences, perhaps psychedelic experiences. This is where Krishna slips in, a little traditional cactus or fungus or whatever. And possibly there's reference to that. This we don't know. But so Arjuna is seeing, he's actually starting to see within the form infinity, not as if the form is a manifestation of infinity, which would be a dualist. The infinity is over here, and then these are like little things. But if you look closely, just like in mathematics, if you look at something closely, and you zoom in 10 layers, it's like totally astonishing. And then you zoom in, there's no end to it. And so the infinity is actually what's there. And so his experience is really nice for a long time, because he's also actually seeing all these forms, that are from different peoples or different, that which is, supreme to this group of people or supreme to these other types of people. They don't have to be people, they could be different intelligent species, or maybe non-intelligent. Everyone has their kind of projection of what it is that is, of interest. And it just seems to be a characteristic of humans, but I think it's probably a characteristic of a number of other intelligent creatures, to basically to create a kind of, I don't know if I want to distract us, but to create a kind of religion. Or even if it's stupid, But there's a saying that man is, or humans, man, is metaphysics. In other words, what humans do is, because we have only so much information, we construct in our minds, an explanation of things, and then but we don't have proof of it, but we believe in it. In other words, part of our ego says, I got the thing that's going to work for me. And so we have assumed, our kind of religious conclusion. But in fact, and we think, I believe it, but then there's part of your mind, which I think Arjuna is starting to get a look into. There's another part of your mind which is laughing at you and saying, that's really dumb, because you don't really know that, And so, in a sense, as in the Jungian sense, the unconscious mind, which is where a lot of your intelligence ends up operating, in which, if I come to you and I say, oh, I am, so-and-so, and then part of my mind knows that is, kind of a ridiculous, manipulative claim. That part, and I don't acknowledge my inner, what's a nice word? I got an inner narcissist, an inner dictator, an inner tyrant, an inner wannabe God, which later in the Gita, Krishna starts, saying, like these beings, once they get, into bad habits, there's no end to the power and the money they want. So what the universal form is, that it ends up, Arjuna starts to see this infinity of types of lords and gods and things seen. It's like this whole thing is opening. And so at first, I think it's very exciting to Arjuna. He's getting it. And this is the visceral, or the experience he's having. And I'm sure it's totally overwhelming. It's described that way. And so not only is it, and the beautiful thing is, not only is it just reading, but and artists, traditional artists in India, have tried to make drawings of this, which is good luck. But it's like, if you can't talk about it, but it's the only thing worth talking about. So we're going to talk about it anyway, even though we can't talk about it. And then he comes to this point, I see you without beginning, middle, or end, unlimited, infinitely powerful, endless arms, with the moon and the sun as your eyes, with your mouth as blazing fire, and all of a sudden, so at this point, his experience starts to change slightly, and he sees that everything, between heaven and earth and in between all the spaces, that's you. That's you who, earlier he was saying, that's you who are the beloved. Now he's just saying, it's you. And then an interesting verse 21, he says, the yonder communities of gods entering you, some of them are terrified. And so they're singing your praises with reverent gestures. In other words, they're being like really good. And they're calling out swasti, which is a greeting in swastivo, like in, when they say, like in Thai, they say savati, that's the Thai way of saying swasti. Good health, good flow. But they're also the hosts of rishis, who are people who actually have the true vision, and they are, the rishis and the great perfected beings are singing your praise with abundant, splendorous songs. So that all of these beings are going into this manifestation of time, and in it their bodies are going to be, destroyed or ground up. But some of them are like happy, and others are like going, oh no. Okay. And so there's different qualities, depending on the level of understanding that these beings have. And so, around verse 23, it starts to go down.
Can I ask, who are the avestors?
Oh, the
Stream drinking avestors?
The stream drinkers. Let's see, the Marus, the Ashwins, the Avestors. I just translated stream drinking Avestors.
You didn't translate them?
I did translate that. That's what it says, stream drinkers.
I never heard that word, avestor.
Yeah. So it might be referring to a level of siddhas.
What?
A level of siddhas where one is a stream enterer.
Oh, yeah, well, that's
So now I'm a stream drinker.
Okay.
Okay. But I can only speculate at this point.
It
could be a type of serpent.
I never ran into that one.
Yeah.
Avestor.
So a great classical metaphor is like when you jump from one bank of a small stream, like when you're out walking here, and there's a stream maybe this wide, and if you're young, you can hop side to side down the stream, and you know what eventually happens, there's a little bit of mud or something on the bank, and you go whoop, and you slip into the stream by accident, and then you're carried downstream until you get hung up on something. And this is a classic metaphor used, implied in the Yoga Sutra commentaries, where you're come into a lower level of samadhi, which they call vitarka, in which the mind is still doing a dialectic, a logical dialectic, to be or not to be, and all of these, and the dialectic, the intellectual dialectic is forming a kind of scaffolding, a framework to really keep you on the topic, which we're not allowed to say what the topic is, but it's about what is or it's about what isn't, maybe it's about, and so you're going down the stream, and this is taking you deeper and deeper, and then you just slip, because there's not a technique, but it's almost like, boom, you're just caught by surprise. It's just like when you're caught by surprise, by something beautiful. Like you walk outside on one of these beautiful days, and just the wind blows in the leaves, and there's some bird sings, and you just go, wow, and you fall. But it's not something you can really arrange for. I am going to arrange for me to disappear. We like to think that I am going to arrange for my concept of me to disappear.
Yes.
Yeah, it usually doesn't work out. But you slip into the stream, and then further down the stream you wash up, or you slip into the middle path, where things are actually flowing, but then you get hung up again on perhaps a more subtle level of stream hopping. And that keeps going, to more and more subtle levels. Okay. So, having seen you, O great mighty armed one, all the worlds and I too tremble. Okay, so Arjuna is starting to get back to kind of the situation at the beginning of the book, because we see many mouths and many eyes, numberless arms, thighs and feet, which has many bellies and mouth gaping with horrible tusks. So somehow, from over one verse, Arjuna was having a good experience, and all of a sudden, he's seeing the divine forms, which ultimately are projections of vikalpa, or kalpa,
Mhm.
deep, maybe that, is it his imagination or is it just imagination? You can think about that. But he's seeing it and you go, ugh, because it's, and so he's starting to see impermanence from the point of view of like, this is really scary stuff. And so there's terrible tusks inside the numerous number of mouths. And some of these mouths are belching flames. Okay. And it's just the way, occasionally, if you've ever gotten frustrated or angry, occasionally you just go, and you get back in touch with your more reptilian roots, I think. Okay. And so then, having seen you touching the sky, blazing with many colors, with gaping open mouth and gigantic fiery eyes, I am shivering through my very being. Oh, and I can't find any stability or peace. Oh, Vishnu. So that's a less familiar name for his pal, who's said more than this. So he's becoming, more of a humbled person. And so I have no sense of direction, having seen your mouths filled with tusks like the fires of time. And I cannot find shelter or comfort. So be merciful, Lord of gods, shelter of the universe. And so he's back, but he's back to the point where, and he asks for mercy. Okay, because he still knows intuitively that kindness or mercy, because he still isn't in touch with his, rather developed and compassionate nature. Okay. And then he sees over there all of the sons of Dhritarashtra. So Dhritarashtra is the blind king whose actual son is the psychopathic, evil.
The bad guy.
He's the bad guy, and he's a really bad guy. Okay, and so all of the sons of Dhritarashtra are entering into you, and indeed all of the thrones of kings and rulers too. So he's seeing, the bad guys are going into you, and it's almost good. But then he sees all of these other kings from all of these surrounding kingdoms, and then he sees, there goes Bhishma, who is one of his gurus,
Right.
and then Drona, who's also one of his gurus, and Karna, who is not his guru, but who's also a great warrior, a bit of a competitor. So he's seeing this, and he's like, wait a minute. So it's getting very personal, So imagine if you just having this kind of hallucinatory experience, on it. But if all of a sudden you're starting to see, at least in your imagination, the deaths of everybody you know, particularly the people you know really well. So Arjuna is starting to get deep into his, what do I say, his body? This absolute terror. And so they're entering your mouths, which are filled with dreadful tusks, this is verse 27. And some are seen stuck between the teeth, with their heads crushed. So this is a nice vision of like ordinary nature's process, where the leaves are falling in. He's saying it all as everybody has their heads crushed and in between the teeth, just like with spinach, it's stuck there. And so it is a bit, and there are drawings like this that you see in other cultures that are actually of, different levels of hell. And so this is one of the monsters in the deeper levels of hell. And I thought this was supposed to be a nice supreme being. And then a couple of more verses. They enter quickly into your mouths, filled with tusks, some stuck between the teeth, with head crushed. Many torrents of water, rivers, and streams flow into the ocean. So these heroes of the human world flow into your flaming mouths, just as moths fly into a bright light to their own destruction. So all of these worlds, so all of a sudden it's all of the worlds, hells and heavens and in-betweens, and all of those worlds are going into the mouth of time. And so you lick and swallow from all directions, all the worlds, with flaming mouths, O Vishnu. Your fierce and terrible brilliance fills and consumes the whole universe with splendor. Oh, so he's still on the edge, you know. Because remember, originally, quite a few verses ago, this was like this glorious vision, you know, as bright as 1,000 suns rising in the sky. Morning, good morning in Hampton. And so then, he's in a different, you know, this is a spiral where he's back to the same problem that he had when he was, you know, unable to hold his bow. But he's evolved, you know, he's much closer. And he says, tell me who you are, O terrible form. That's his new name for his friend, O terrible form. And salutation to you, oh, you are the finest of the gods, which is, of course, you know, in this stage, you're not going to say you're the worst, you're the finest. And be merciful, be kind, I want to understand you, primordial being, so we're back to instructions. And then another very famous verse, I'm not sure which of the, I'll tell you this, Kalosmi lokakshaya krit, I am time, or kala, and I am the destroyer of the world. And so, I am time, powerful, ripe, mature destruction of the universe, arising here to thoroughly eliminate the worlds, even without you. The warriors arranged in opposing formations shall all cease to be. Okay, so you can take that on a literal level in which, and indeed, they will all cease to be eventually. It turns out in the myth of Mahabharata, many died, and there were a number of survivors, but after, you know, I think it took about 15 or 20 years, they all managed to meet some kind of death. But also, if you look at these opposing armies as anything that makes up opposition, you know, either within the world or within the mind, and all of these patterns of opposition are impermanent, and they will cease to be. Okay. So then he gets again to, and so now Vishnu, as this frightening thing, goes back to the initial don't be afraid instruction. Therefore, because they're all going to cease to be, therefore you should stand up and gain glory and honor. Okay, so literally, in the story, he's telling him to fight, but figuratively by this time, and later in the book, he'll say, stand up and do yoga, okay, or say, stand up and do what you want. But he wants him to, like, you know, be awake for this and not just go off into some kind of, you know, total fear where he's dysfunctional. So stand up. And having conquered foes, enjoy a thriving kingdom, which of course, Arjuna, it's how you're going to enjoy a kingdom is if you've already killed all your friends in order to get it. So, and then he says, they've already been destroyed by me. Just be merely the instrument. Okay, so this is again the same argument which I'm not comfortable with. But in a sense, truly we are instruments of, you know, everything. You know, I'm an instrument of service to others. But the whole thing of enjoy a thriving kingdom, you know, at this stage is kind of and it's, remember, be the instrument, and then he calls him an ambidextrous archer. So Arjuna is ambidextrous, which is interesting considering that he's existing between two armies. You know, they pulled in the middle path between two armies. And then he's ambidextrous in terms of he can assume or flip side to side with equal skill all of his thinking processes as well as all of his martial process. So he was able to shoot, from behind his back. A big thing that Arjuna does is he shoots arrows from behind his back with great action. He can do it either hand quickly. He can go back and forth changing. Another thing he does in Mahabharata is he had to win the hand of who was their wife.
Right.
Oh, that was anyway. But was that Rama? Oh, okay. Oh, perhaps it was Rama who had to shoot in order to win the hand of the princess. Oh, it was Sita, it was Rama. I get all these good guys confused.
Oh, Buddha, you mean, when he shot them in his contest?
Yeah.
He shot through 7 trees and then dug a spring.
Oh, no, that's a good one, too. This is where he had to shoot through the center point of a chariot wheel.
Oh.
By looking at its reflection. He had to do it from behind his back, looking at a reflection of it in the mirror,
Oh, cool.
And he was able to do it. That was just one of the things he had to do. I think that was Arjuna. Anyway, and so we're almost like we think, well, why have we been reading this book? We're full circle back to this, like, fear. And so basically he's getting, have we progressed at all? But we've just, and so, again, so Sanjaya then takes over and he says to the blind king, having heard these words of Keshava, so Vishnu, Krishna has just told Arjuna to not be, to get up and just do it, okay. And so then the words of Keshava, so again the word Keshava means someone with really nice hair. And so they start talking about their hairdos, which is like, okay. The trembling, diademed one made salutations. So Arjuna as well as Krishna were both royalty, in a sense. And so he made salutations with folded hands in front of his heart, bowing yet again, extremely frightened. And then he says, the world rightly rejoices and is delighted by your manifestations. Plural. Not your manifestation, but your endless ones. And the demons are terrified and run in all directions. So the demonic and fear of impermanence, maybe there's a connection there. And yet the throngs of perfected beings, and so there are throngs and throngs of perfected beings throughout the infinite worlds. Like bodhisattvas, Buddhas, the throngs of them. And they're sending salutations like, hey, they're quite pleased with the whole thing. And why should they not make homage to you, O great being? Greater, weightier than Brahma, the creator God. And, O infinite God of God, shelter of the universe, you are imperishable, the real and the unreal, and you are beyond all of that. And you're the primordial God, original person, the ultimate refuge, knower of the known, the ultimate goal and purpose. The world is prevailed by you, O infinite form. And he goes on, thousands of salutations again and again. Adoration to you from the front, from behind, and then from all directions. So, and this is done when you go to certain holy places. You'll bow at the front door, and then you circumambulate, and at every doorway you spin around and you bow, and then even sometimes you'll go around like a holy mountain.
Mm-hmm.
They call it Dandabat Parikram.
Mm-hmm.
I know that it's
Right.
where you circumambulate, you lie down, touching, all the
5 limbs.
and then you saying, your prayers and mantras. You stand up, and then I think you get to put your feet where your head was.
3 steps wrong and one.
Yeah, and then you lie down, and it could take a while. It's a real. If you're a yoga practitioner and sun salutations seem to be a bit much for you, you can do what they call dandavat parikram around Mount Meru.
Yeah.
And then you'll rush back to do your sunset resting. And so he's praising him, and then this is where all of a sudden he starts to evolve again, and this is where it gets interesting. So he said, you envelop and you penetrate all things. In fact, you are all things. So he's starting to, break through his dualistic problems of which is better, work or action, or how do you see? And he's actually getting this. And so then he says to you, thinking of you as a friend, and this is what he's done in the past, because these two are pals, thinking of you as a friend and impetuously saying to you, hey Krishna, hey Yadava, hey my pal, literally. And he was saying that not knowing that this was infinity. Okay. You're not knowing your great majesty through intoxication. When I was saying that, maybe I was intoxicated because I'm sure they would hang out, or even through affection. And yet we do that with each other sometimes. We're sitting around, the cafe. Or,
That's interesting, that one. There's an incident when the Buddha first comes to his first 5 students. When they see him coming, they say, oh, here comes that horrible Buddha. He ate food, he's not starving anymore. Just don't even get up when he comes, don't settle him or anything, And then when he gets near them, they kind of all nervously, energy is so huge, they jump up. And then automatically they come to their feet, but then sort of nervously they say, well, hey pal, how you doing, type of thing. And then he says, I'm not your pal. I'm not the one you think you know. I'm Buddha now, type of thing. And then there's a little exchange like that. It's a famous scene. So this idea that he fears that, he remembers treating Krishna as a kind of fellow locker room, fellow warrior.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Yeah.
Hey, pal.
And true, with any of us too, like if we knew really what was going on, I'm sure there'll be a moment where, you say, oh, like that, and you go, oh, and we go through all of that, different phases of theistic dualism and things, and then eventually I go, and we get back. Okay, so here it's coming back down into a very nice place. And so he's still apologizing, as if with the purpose of joking, because they would joke around, and particularly Krishna is a big jokester, and it was what he was famous for. And I always think of Voltaire.
Who?
Voltaire.
Oh, right.
God is a comedian
I did.
playing to an audience too afraid to laugh.
I didn't know that Voltaire said that.
And so as with the person, you were treated without respect while playing, or when we're hanging out in bed or seated or eating when alone, or even right before the eyes of others. I ask for your forgiveness, your pardon. Okay, and he said, you are the Father of the world, of the moving and the unmoving, to be worshipped and adored by it as the most venerable Guru. Okay. And all of this, in a sense, is true, because there is nothing comparable to you in all the 3 worlds. How could there be another surpassing you, O incomparable? So therefore, making obeisances, prostrating, I beg for your indulgence. Be, O Lord, to be honored like a father to a son. Then here's where it starts to, and he goes, a friend to a friend, a lover to beloved. Be merciful, O Lord, O Deva. And then it's coming, he says, I'm delighted to see that which has never been seen, and my mind is trembling with fear. So show me your normal form, O Lord. Be merciful, beloved of gods and shelter of the worlds. So he's a good practitioner. He's surrendering, he's taking shelter, and he's requesting, and he's implying, that it's going to be mercy. I want to see you wearing. So in the story, there are different forms. So initially, he says, "I just want to see you wearing your crown, holding your club, and spinning your discus." So he at least wants him to get back to the. It's not the everyday form, but the beautiful contemplative form of Vishnu. So Vishnu has 4 arms, holds, the conch shell and the discus, the club, and is quite beautiful. And just like in, many of the traditions that are developing then, much of the esoteric yoga, which means esoteric meaning hatha yoga, tantric yoga, is taught through the visualization. Because we use our imagination, we do it anyway. We're all visualizers. And so if you sit and you assume the same posture as if you had 4 arms, not that you're thinking necessarily on the vision, you might notice your mind thinking that, and then your intelligence will laugh at you. But you want to have that same good posture as if you were wearing a crown, or as if you were seated. So when you think about something, you really assume that thing. So if I think about someone who's really miserable, my body kind of automatically assumes that same form. So if I think of like some hopeless, I don't want to give you any examples because you might do it, but of someone who's not very nice, who's not very happy, who's crazy, and you're sitting there, and in order to be empathetic with them, you assume their form, and that's why you got to be careful with what you think. Okay, so you become what you think, and so he wanted to see the forearm form, which is considered extremely contemplative and peaceful. And so, Krishna right away appeared that way, because that was pretty much the way he was as a chariot driver. Except then he wanted to see, his most normal form, which was Krishna as his friend, who was rather casual, but they were both very good looking, Arjuna and Krishna, and both very stunning. And so finally he got back to that. And so Krishna said, "By my grace to you, Arjuna, the supreme form manifested from the yoga of true self." So from yoga, it manifested, luminous, all things. So the supreme form was all things. It wasn't like something that, is stored off, in some warehouse somewhere that we only pull out for every few yugas or so, when somebody prepares their herbs correctly, but it's all things. So it's happening right now. And so, the universal form is what you're experiencing now. We're just not paying attention to it. So from the yoga of the true self, luminous, all things, infinite power, never before seen by any other than you. So this is part of the story. And there's a whole philosophical discussion earlier in the game, the fact that Krishna says, all this, and he says, but hardly, and he talks about all the great practitioners and seers and rishis, but he says, hardly anyone actually knows me, because there's not like one. When you see this, you are no longer anybody. You disappear as this manifests. And that's a common teaching in the internal yoga, like the central channel, or if you're visualizing, you install one of the goddess in the pelvic floor chakra, which you prepared through careful vinyasa practice, and cleaned it, and then you invite the deity to come. And the deities particularly some of them, they'll only come if nobody's looking.
What?
If nobody's looking.
Huh.
Because they're very, they don't want any voyeurs. And so the looker would be the constructed imaginary self, which is the ego. And so they'll only appear if nobody's looking. And they are the essential, they are pure looking in and of themselves, or pure awareness. And so it's repeated a number of times that Krishna says, well, hardly, maybe not even anybody knows me. And Arjuna is like, what are you talking about? What about all these thousands of beings? And so it says, by my grace, the supreme form is manifested. And not by Vedic sacrifice or chanting, not by giving charity, not by ceremonial acts, or by terrible austerities can I be seen. Okay, in this Vishwarupa, or the universal form. And he says, in this human, can I be seen in such a form in this human world by anyone else but you, O hero of gurus? Don't be afraid, don't be bewitched, seeing this frightening form of mine. Free of fear and cheerful at heart, behold this form of me. And then Sanjaya, the narrators, having spoken to Arjuna, Vasudeva showed his own form, which is everyday, your everyday experience that we always tend to ignore, like even your current experience. Well, even if you start looking for your current experience that you're having, you're probably overlooking it. Because you probably have a preconception. Like if I tell you to watch your breath, or maybe feel your breath, you probably have a preconception of what breath feels like. And so you start looking for that, and you're not really paying attention to what's actually arising. It's just, what a situation that is. Okay. And so the great being became again gentle, sweet in form. He calmed the terrified Arjuna. And so anyway, this is then the very final part. So Sanjaya is saying to the blind king, seeing this sweet human form, I am beloved in mind and have returned to my natural state. So Arjuna said that. So Arjuna is finally calm, end of 11th chapter. And then, so Bhagavan, so the form you've seen is difficult. Even the gods are always eager to behold this form. I cannot be seen as you are seeing me by the Veda, and by Veda they are meaning pretty much what they call the karma kanda, which is the very ritualistic orthodox Vedic practice, where people are actually trying just to get to higher and higher heavens without the esoteric understanding that is kind of hidden in the Vedas. And so, nor by austerity, which is just gritty yoga practice, or toughness. Austerity is sometimes good, like jumping into cold lakes. That would be austerity. Or by giving gifts, which is good to do. Doesn't mean you shouldn't give gifts, but just giving gifts might not do it. Or ritual sacrifice. And he says, by undistracted devotion alone can I be known and seen and truly entered into. Okay. So, that's kind of the resolution of that messy chapter. Very messy chapter.
It is. Very what?
Messy. And it's always associated with Oppenheimer.
With what?
Oppenheimer. When they tested the first nuclear weapon.
He quotes it, doesn't he?
He quotes
the first bomb go off.
Yeah. And I'm not sure which verse he quoted. I'm confused, but some have said, Kalosmi lokakshaya, I am time, come to destroy the world. And then somebody else told me, no, it's as if 1,000 suns would arise simultaneously. And
so
so
you go blind if you look at it, that's right.
yeah. So I'm not sure,
nuclear weapon.
both would be good
Mhm.
quotes, but it's like,
And part of this whole thing is the power of visualization. In fact, Arjuna visualizing the whole thing with this third eye that gives him a different dimension, like the capacity to go internally. And then at the end where it said, no one technique is going to get you there. It is a process of going internally and so, and even when then Krishna comes back to his, normal form, that's an imaginary form also. And Arjuna has just, calmed himself down. It's like you've had a bad nightmare and you wake up and then you calm yourself back down. So it's, the whole chapter is, in a way, showing us the power of how the mind distorts things and also has insight and also then can cause great destruction to one's own process by allowing fear and emotion to come, become so powerful that you can't get your footing. But then this time he does. So that's good. So, yeah.
a lot of people think, well, the book should end right there.
What's that?
We should end the book right there.
But
But
we
no,
know
it all
next
starts
is
again.
bhakti,
Yeah, then I have to teach
next is devotion.
very systematically. And so the bhakti, and of course, when I first hear that, I think, well, I'm going to do bhakti, and I'm not going to do these other things.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just go for,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll just be devoted to, Krishna.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And that isn't actually what's being taught. That's the convenient, simple interpretation, where all of a sudden I have found the way, and I have the superior way, and so I can kind of strut around and just feel sorry for others because they don't know my special, unique way. But that is reducing. So bhakti isn't actually, the claiming to be a bhakta. In fact, a good bhakta might not claim to even be a bhakta. They say, oh, maybe one of these lifetimes, maybe I get a dim,
Arjuna.
a dim reflection of it. But it's like something one wouldn't claim to be. You would simply continue on to think, what is this? And Arjuna by this time has finally, really developed his curiosity, which he's had from the beginning, and a kind of honesty where he won't accept, just the teachings blindly. So, and that's a beautiful thing about Arjuna. He says, now tell me again, because he's he's very honest with the fact that, the way that it's been presented is not clear to him. So where does it go?
Hmm? So, in a way, he's saying, no, but in a way, he's sort of backing away from the go fight, He sort of says go fight, but then here he's saying, actually, the best people are the ones who just love me.
Yeah.
He doesn't really,
He totally
and if
backs
they
away,
do act,
yeah.
then they don't act with any wish for any result,
Yeah.
because they're only focused on me.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit, it's contradicting his thing about you absolutely have to go fight.
Yeah, and what then he's changing the meaning of what it means to be fight.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it means stand up,
Yes.
be brave, and sometimes, that might appear, as we were saying the other day, sometimes it takes more courage in a military situation to not fight.
Mm-hmm.
than just to follow orders, particularly because he's telling him to, investigate, to find out what your actual duty is.
Yes.
And so Arjuna's duty he wasn't just a warrior, but he was also royalty, and he had, earlier in the Mahabharata myth, he was a negotiator. So he and Krishna, they were trying to work out with this other side, all kinds of deals and all kinds of negotiations, and they kept getting, cheated by the other side. And so part of his duty is to negotiate, to try to make peace. And then it says that even if he's doing later, talking about duty, if you have to do what needs to be done. So like if you have to carry out the garbage, that's your, in a certain context, you got to just do that in order then to get back to your meditation practice.
And so Dharma is very much emphasized, as a contextual thing, rather than you have this Dharma that is your chosen Dharma, your caste or whatever. It depends on the circumstance. And they emphasize it a little bit at the beginning, and then right here, the circumstance is huge. That, you see how vast the circumstance is.
And then you're not allowed to be, even as a kshatriya. Is this working? You're not allowed as a kshatriya, if you're an honorable kshatriya, to have any anger towards the person that you might have to be smiting or eliminating or controlling or arresting or kicking. But so there are all these codes, and so it's not done with any sense of like, I'm going to get anything out of it. But ultimately you have to see the other person. And so this is being taught in the last part of the Gita, how to be and it's no easy task to be a yogi and to also be a kshatriya. In fact, it's one of those things, oh my God. How to do that with compassion towards other beings. It's like how to be a police officer, okay? Which can be very useful, it can be very helpful, and we need that. But how to do that, with integrity, with compassion, with intelligence, and to be effective, These are questions, and it's not that this is giving an answer, except, the more you practice, and you practice cultivating this vision of other beings, then you're going to be better at whatever that is that, your swadharma, your circumstances dictate that you have to do. And so it turns out that it's, particularly through the last chapters of the book, it's very anti-violent, it's totally, you got to be, it's all about being nice to other people, not being at all greedy, not at all selfish. Even for, no matter what your situation in life is. And if you are, then you suffer the consequences and you make a mess. And, so the standards are fairly high in that way. Does anyone have any questions? Like who, what, why? Silent.
Just a quick point of clarification. If I heard Richard correctly, at the transition back, Krishna's form doesn't change at all, but Arjuna's vision returns to seeing Krishna as he did before, because Krishna is always all of those things, and he was given a particular view into it, and then that view is taken away, but Krishna doesn't change. Arjuna's vision changes.
In the story, it appears like if you were to do a movie of it, in the story, it would seem that, Krishna just like reappeared, it's sweeter and sweeter until it's like, oh, it's my old
Shape.
friend. But, for our understanding, nothing has it's Arjuna's heart that's changed, and finally he sees, he's seeing that nature is actually life, and nature actually very sweet and gorgeous, stunningly amazing process, and that's what he's seeing. Okay, and mythologically is represented as his charioteer is now like appearing normal. And I don't think anyone else on the battle, on the two armies that are thinking, what are Krishna and Arjuna doing out there on that chariot? They probably didn't see the universal form. They were all pumped up by blowing conch shells and getting ready, I'm sure they were chanting, doing conch shells. But yeah. And so as yogis, we would not necessarily insist because we want to really observe what's going on. Because as we see, if I can observe what's going on, then, and so it's not like I got to change it. But then we start, well, I change it because there's this paradox where I need to make it, I can't observe it, so I'm going to go through these various stages of being able to see it, which are practice. And then I'll finally occasionally get a glimpse or a taste of it.
I could be wrong, but correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not that the capacity for that vision is taken away. It's that it shifts. So it seems in this section that this is...
He no longer craves that kind of vision.
He doesn't.
Because he's totally satisfied.
Yeah.
But he understands now. It's just like we as having practiced yoga, we don't really crave the really wild states of samadhi, which at a certain point we might. Like, man, I wish I could see that, going on. So I huff and puff and, strangle myself or something in order to get an out-of-body experience. But that's no longer of interest to someone who's actually having this realization.
Thank you. Yes, it's just a much finer expression of what I was trying to get at, which is that the change is in Arjuna.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The craving goes away, but because Krishna is ultimately everything, he can't change because he's Krishna.
Yeah, the separation starts to dissolve. The
Mhm.
boundaries start to dissolve.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Or comments. Or give an answer and we'll make a question. Yeah.
Since we're talking about both the Gita as well as Buddhism, I wanted to make a comparison to what we talked about earlier today, the difference between an answer knowing and not knowing. So in this process, Krishna is learning the answer so that he can bring forth it correctly when Krishna inquiries it from him. Is it the difference between the two different answers that we talked about this afternoon?
I didn't get it.
Yeah. So I think I know what you're talking about. So
Good.
Krishna is crafting different answers for Arjuna, but they're crafted in the sense that he's trying to almost build Arjuna's understanding, often giving Arjuna answers that he knows Arjuna will stumble with, just to kind of make Arjuna sincere. He wants to give him an answer that makes Arjuna say, wait a minute.
To make him think.
To make him think and to inquire and to look, rather than just, so otherwise if Arjuna were could memorize the answer and then just write it on his exam, and he would get his certificates, which unfortunately a lot of, contemporary schools might be like that. And so I think he's very skillfully prodding, and he deliberately gives him, answers that are a little bit twisted. As you read the text again and again and again, he'll give him an answer that's almost a trap, that he knows will almost make sense, but then will throw Arjuna off, perhaps, into a different mode of inquiry. And so at a certain point, like earlier, because he's teaching wisdom initially, and then he starts teaching Sankhya, and everybody, thinks they understand Sankhya, because it's one of the earlier schools, and it's a natural school because it's based on a very simple dualism. You have Purusha, who is you, and then you have Prakriti, which is the world, creative energy. And the two really can't interact. The Purusha is eternal, and the Prakriti is just pure impermanence. And so what happens is people think, oh, I'll just look at everything, oh, that's Prakriti, that's Prakriti, that's Prakriti. And they don't really stick with the meditation that long. And they think, I am Purusha, I am Purusha. But they haven't really gone deeply into the study because they didn't have a jokester prodding them, because there's built into the Sankhya system a very obvious self-reference paradox if you stick with it. And so a lot of, the yogis, they would stick with it and they would say, wait a minute, okay, if everything that is experienced is Prakriti, and you can't experience Purusha, let me see. So the idea of Prakriti and Purusha is composed of Prakriti. Okay. And so what they do is and what Krishna is, he deconstructs the whole thing that the idea of Atman or Purusha is anything at all. Any even thought you have about it, that's purely a composition of Prakriti. And so then in other words, he's exposing that eventually, and he says it's extremely hard, he says it's very, very hard to understand action and inaction. Okay, the way of action is totally mysterious. And then he says, but those who are awakened, when they only see gunas acting on gunas, in any level of experience, even the highest mental levels where the ego games and the deity games are playing out, none of that is technically Purusha in the Sankhya system. And so Purusha is not a thing, it's only represented mythologically. But we're all mythologists, stuck in our kind of mediocre, suffering mythologies. Okay. But Purusha is not a thing. And so Purusha is merely, and so later schools, because everyone would hit on Sankhya, they'd steal the gunas, but they would, say, well, Purusha doesn't, Purusha doesn't, or it's just Atman instead. And the non-dual school would try to break it down. And really what Purusha is saying, Purusha is not a thing, a seer or a subject. It is merely the process of experience. And so they say, oh, it's just pure consciousness. But anything you think consciousness is, that is consciousness. Okay, those are like symbols. Oh, I think of a sun rising in the sky. And that, but somehow there's an awareness of that, but that isn't what awareness is. The same thing as Atman, and so it functions in a similar way to the idea of emptiness. Emptiness is just allowing you to see, so you stop looking for separateness, like there, and you experience the interpenetration of things. And so he's basically saying that yoga is Sankhya, and Sankhya is yoga. And if you see, and he says children, he uses the word bala, children see them as different. But pundits know that they're the same. And so he's just like disseminated, but reestablished the Sankhya system. Disseminated the fact that it's a fake duality, maybe even set up that way deliberately, and that actually it's this non-dualism, which allows just. And then he says, so there's no one seeing, and so the yogi thinks, I'm not doing anything, even though they're walking around doing stuff. He says, even as they're opening and closing their eyes, and he even used the term something to do with apana, or defecating, and eating. He has a whole list of all these activities.
Which chapter is this? Is it 15?
Yeah, it's somewhere in the, it's one of the ones that nobody ever reads, because it's, and so the yogi's doing all of this stuff, that even great sages do, unless they're lying there with their breath suspended. And even then, there certain things are happening, biologically in their belly or something. And he says, but nobody's doing anything. The sage sees that. It's just gunas acting on gunas. So even when you're talking, it's merely gunas acting on gunas. There's not a doer, or separate ego. And that's a great insight. And, but to get to understand that, you've got to more or less expose someone's misconceptions, their projections, and so it's just a step-by-step deconstruction of Arjuna's experience. And Krishna gets deconstructed in the process, but he doesn't seem to mind. And he doesn't seem to mind, playing a game with Arjuna. And then later in the Mahabharata, Krishna dies too. Wait a minute, you said you're imperishable. Turns out he has an Achilles heel from long, long ago when he was, probably on some trip, to the Mediterranean or something. When Achilles was dipped in a vat of nectar to keep him invulnerable on the battlefield, and so he was coated with this nectar. So Achilles was indestructible, except for his heel, where they were holding him when they dipped him. And Krishna somehow wound up in the same condition. Through this many lifetimes, he somehow wound up.
Really? He died from a wound in the heel?
He got shot with an arrow through his heel. And the poet was fully of, it didn't seem to bother him. He was quite ready to go at that point. He sits down. And his brother at that point, who's the Naga, who appeared as his younger brother, who's always helping, totally selfless.
So how do they, I just was thinking about it, how do they rationalize the Krishna of the Bhagavatam and this Krishna? So, the pundits, the Western historians have something to say, but what do they say? In other words, in the Bhagavatam, there's no battle of Kurukshetra, right? Krishna doesn't get involved.
Oh, in the Bhagavatam, though, Krishna leaves Vrindavan, the countryside.
He goes and destroys the bad king, but it's a completely different bad guy. It's not the Duryodhana, it's not Dhritarashtra and all that. So it's a whole separate story.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a whole separate Krishna. So how do they reconcile the two, the Panditas?
It's magic, you don't have to recognize.
Magic.
Yeah, Maya.
So, but if the one in the Mahabharata gets killed, then the one in the Bhagavatam never can get killed.
Oh, the one in the Bhagavatam disappears. There was the end of that yuga, and the beginning when he leaves. So I believe they tie it up in a similar way.
Really?
In the Bhagavatam, yeah.
But they don't say that after he beat Kamsa, and the Herod figure, the one in the Bhagavatam, that then later he goes and has a Mahabharata battle. They don't say
I
that.
don't believe so, but
No, they
somehow
don't.
he and his brother all leave.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, because then
where they go? Yeah.
he has to come back as
And so I think
Buddha, he comes back as Buddha
that's right.
in the 10 avatars of Vishnu. So they have a few loose ends hanging.
Oh, that doesn't bother anybody.
Well, someone like Shankara or someone like that, or the people who are strong, Bhagavatans,
Yeah.
and they must have some way of explaining it.
Oh, I'm sure.
I'm sure they have come up
Yeah.
with some
And the
rationale.
fact that this was set up, that Krishna, because Krishna doesn't really die, he merely unmanifests.
Yes, yes.
And what I was going to say, his younger brother, just before that, saw that because all of the kingdom that he was in charge of, they all killed them. They got really drunk one night, and they just made a big mess. And
I
some
see.
sage had cursed them,
Right.
and they
But
somehow
they
all got killed.
They don't try to put the Bhagavatam Krishna life story before the
They
Babylon.
do. They have a way of sliding it back.
They slide it back.
They slide
I
it back.
see.
Yeah.
So that after he destroys Kamsa, then later adventure
Oh yeah,
gets
much
into the
later.
Mahabharata.
Yeah.
So it is the
Because
same lifetime.
he's
So
the,
they're arguing it's the same lifetime.
it's the same.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I just didn't know that.
And so the person who shot him, there was a whole reason that they thought he was a deer, and he was killed by somebody who had arranged some previous,
I see.
curses and things, and Krishna was ready to check out because everything was time, and so he.
You have to go be Buddha.
Yeah. And so, as he said, he keeps coming back.
So
in order
then
to-
Rama, does he have any lifetimes between being Rama and Krishna? Rama is like is the seventh, right? Krishna is the eighth, Buddha is the ninth. So then,
Yeah.
how do they discuss that Rama dies and then is reborn immediately as
Yeah, what
Krishna,
happened?
or
Oh no! Well, I think it takes a few.
what?
It takes many yugas,
Yuga.
eons of time.
Really? So the Rama story is then set
A long
in
time ago.
not in the Kali Yuga,
No.
before the Mahabharata war. Okay. Because of course it's a completely later poem.
Yeah.
Totally.
That's what. Yeah.
later.
These historians.
What?
These historians. But that's a fun thing about then trying to, look at a very developed. These mythologies are extensively developed by different poets. Yet they manage somehow to allow them to interweave. And if they, and of course, if they don't fit exactly, well, what's the problem with having 3 or 4 different stories?
3 or 4 what?
3 or 4 different stories.
Right.
Because these are characters that could appear 2 places at once. They're not bound.
Right.
And so they're capable of.
It's like Star Wars. They just keep adding prequels and prequels.
Yeah,
prequels and
Yeah,
prequels.
prequels are the way to do it.
And then a few sequels. That's funny.
Yeah. The last question.
So,
Yeah. What's that?
okay.
Yes,
Oh, it works. Okay. So Arjuna, it seems like Krishna's trying to explain that he's everything. So Arjuna basically is Krishna, right? I mean, Arjuna is.
He even says in the 10th chapter of
Yes.
the
Pandavas, and he says, I am Arjuna. And then he says of poets, I'm Vyasa. So Vyasa is the poet who's composing the
Krishna is saying
Mahabharata.
this.
Krishna says, and of the Pandavas, I'm Arjuna.
So-
who's like the greatest word. So
So,
But
yeah.
Arjuna doesn't. I mean, that would be a lot to take in. Like he seems to not
he
quite.
has trouble taking it.
Yeah.
Is that the point of this? That's the point of this whole thing. Is like I'm everything. So are you. Just by the way, you're everything.
Yeah.
Is that the point?
That's one of the points.
Oh, it's one of the points.
Infinite number of points.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, when Arjuna is saying to Krishna, oh, oh, I bow to you, but
He's lost it at that point.
yeah,
Doesn't
yeah. So because he should be bowing to himself and to the math and to everything, right? I mean, because everything is everything.
Yeah. Who do you bow to?
They almost called it everything is everything, but they called it the Bhagavad Gita. So that, but is that the idea, is that, this is a parable, right? So they're trying to express that, I mean, or is it supposed to be that there are these gods? If it's not dual, then it's supposed to be not that there's these gods that you look to, it's that you are God.
No, you are, God is not the right word.
Or,
You are the beloved.
okay.
Okay. So in the story, even though Krishna is God, that's not, he is also much more than, because God would just be a relational function. You know, like, I'm capable of doing this and that, but that isn't of that, not that much interest. God is he loves to play. He is he is the beloved, and he loves to support and he loves to create this lila. So the universe is no longer just a pocket of suffering, but is a pocket of lila, or love, the play of love. And so,
But he's
But he's
everyone.
also a lover. He loves
Yeah.
everybody.
he loves
So
everybody.
but
and everybody
He
loves
is
him.
love.
that's meant to represent all of us.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, he's just saying, oh, look at me. Oh, yeah, by the way, that's you.
Yeah, by the way, that's you.
Okay.
And look closely at, anyone around you. Look much more closely.
Yeah.
And, then it starts to work. It's not that you look at somebody and say, oh, you're not, where are your 4 arms? Or where's your peacock feather on the top? All those are, used in visualization to make the prana move, in esoteric form. So that's part of the esoteric. But then, Krishna is the beloved in your heart. It doesn't mean that he's necessarily, if you were to do an autopsy, quickly, just as they die and you rip open their heart, you're not going to see a little blue guy going, oh, I was just packing up my stuff. But of course, mythologically, we try to imagine that. The mind will try anything to avoid this. Yeah. So, it is time that we give it away to others. So,
I love it. I think it's just, if you can't just worry about making it too systematic, too much of mixing the story with the teachings. I remember when I used to teach the Gita in sort of Asian religions classes, which I did for a long time. I basically, got over my allergy to being drafted, people being drafted in the army, Vietnam War and everything. And what it is like a synthesis of the 3 main, karma yoga, jnana yoga, and bhakti yoga. And in a way, making bhakti yoga somehow very, very accessible to everybody. And it really fits nicely with the idea of Krishna as the, like Avalokiteshvara, the compassion, love of all Buddhas. And can even deal with this terrible negative situation in a way, and a little bit rationalize it. But, if Arjuna was really listening to the next, right away after the whole thing about stand up and fight, because they're already all dead, and then he's like, oh, but the greatest are people who love me. And then there's jnana and another chapter, and it's just all the other practices are all there.
He gives it all
So
in the very beginning,
Arjuna could easily just, just turn the chariot around. And there's a wonderful former life of the Buddha when he was Indra in the former life, Chakra, and he was having a battle with, as a bodhisattva before being a Buddha, he was having a battle with the asuras, and they were attacking his Olympus, heaven of 33, coming up the slopes of the mountain, And he was temporarily, the gods were temporarily routed by the Asuras, who were the Titans, I prefer to call them, the demons, Titans, and they were charging toward the city, and he was fleeing temporarily to regroup, Indra was, Buddha as an Indra in that life. And his charioteer was charioting him, and the chariot had a really tall pole, like a very high pole, and Indra, Bodhisattva Indra, he looked up and he saw that the pole was going to knock down an eagle's nest. If there's a narrow road in the forest, they were running down a narrow road, and there was no way they could get around that without that pole knocking down the eagle's nest, where there were a bunch of little eaglets. I guess somehow he could see them with they wanted to eat some squirrels or something. And so he told his charioteer, "Okay, stop. And what do you mean stop? We're being chased by the Titans, And he said, yeah, but we're having a war with the Titans, and they have a right to chase us. But those eagles and those eaglets are not involved in our war, and we shouldn't be destroying them. So let's just go back. We'll deal with it. I'm in dry, whatever." So somehow they got Max to turn around. It's a narrow road, but somehow he turns it around. And then they go driving back, and where the hordes are all rushing through the forest to catch them. But then, typical Buddhist ending, then the Titans see him charging back down the road, and they think, "Oh, he's regrouped now, and all the gods are coming. God warriors are coming. They're going to kick our butts," and then they all run away.
Yeah.
So the little thing in the middle of a war where he cares for the eagle who's not involved in it, the animal, is like turns the tide actually. Although he's ready to slug it out with whoever he sees, but doesn't have to because they all run away. But it reminds me of that, somehow.
Yeah.
There's always a choice, in other words.
Yeah. And that's what. So, end of Gita, Krishna says, "Do what you choose, or do what you want." He doesn't say, because he's gone through all of this, where he's thoroughly gone through a critique of, all of these practices when done, with ego or with desire. And by that time, you're just going, And then basically, and you see that Arjuna has to do what he needs to do for in that circumstance, which might not be.
Well,
it might be
he
determined.
did, but he was sort of stuck there.
Yeah.
They were all like there, and it was like, the table was set somehow. But on the other hand, although I must admit, I have to confess, I do drive Nina crazy when she's watching soap operas, because I refuse. I always did as a child. I don't like unhappy endings. I refuse. I absolutely will not have them. And people should go back in time and talk to these people and explain they don't need to do this and do that. It's like not going to work out. You know what I mean? It doesn't work out. And I think Vyasa, I have to say, I feel a kindred spirit in Vyasa as well as in Homer, because both of them take this material of these heroic warriors, which later becomes the fodder of nationalism and right-wingism. Like Modi is only in office because in India they made the Mahabharata as a TV series instead of making the life of Buddha and some other things, And so then they got into like, okay, the Muslims are our enemies and we're going to get them. And they tore down that mosque, and that's been seething there ever since, And but the point is that we have to all undo it, If Krishna is great time, in other words, if he is the wheel of time, and so he says they're all dead anyway, yeah, they're all going to die, of course, but the real thing, what Krishna can do is even they die, he goes and finds them in the bardo and he installs them in a new, better thing, and we don't have this Kali Yuga crap. We don't need the Kali Yuga crap. There's a great woman who, that same woman who called me up and said that my translation was surprisingly accurate. She wrote a great book about cosmologies, and how conservatives, sort of right-wingers, in either in Asia or anywhere, they always have a worldview that the world is decaying. Because this legitimizes their feeling that the youth, the next generation, will be worse than them. So then they can cut off any innovation they're going to do, and they'll just make them try to hold the tradition as much of it as they can and don't change it. What Grandpa did was better, and don't you dare do anything new. And and even though I'm a jerk and I'm miserable, you're going to be more miserable than me. And they always have cosmologies where things are going down the drain. Whereas, and Buddhism adopts that in India in its sort of lowest level. But then the other one, then you have Maitreya coming, another 995 Buddhas, Shambhala is coming, Shangri-La, and they kind of go against that. And then even though I don't like how they understand what Kalki is going to do, the 10th avatar of Vishnu, I don't really, it's going to kill all the asanas. It's like the second coming of the right-wingers' notion of the revelation, Jesus is going to come back, in an F-35. You know what I mean? Made by Raytheon. It's going to blow everybody up. And that's just sick, is what that is. It's disgusting. Why would Jesus bother to do that? He'd come back with a rocket, a nuclear weapon in his tongue, like that. Give me a break. It's just so dumb. And we're not going to tolerate it. So I'm just saying, so that's why I love Gita Govinda. If you take the Krishna trilogy as the Bhagavatam and this Gita, and then the Gita Govinda. Do you know the Gita Govinda? Well, Barbara Miller translated, it's called The Love Song of the Dark Lord in English, but it's written by Jayadeva. It's about 8th, 9th centuries late and very influenced by Tantra, I think. But the burden of the story, and this is another kind of side of Krishna, is that Krishna is repentant because he's been very naughty, because he went running and frolicking around with all the gopis. And Radha is pissed off. And he's going to go jumping around with all those gopis, forget about him. I don't want to see him. Of course, she's totally adores him, but she makes a big thing about it. And then they have in Indian poetic literature the Sakhi, which means the girlfriend, who is the go-between, So then Krishna's all disconsolate and he's so upset because Radha doesn't want to see him. And so he tries to tell the Sakhi, the girlfriend, tell Radha that, I'm sorry. They just, I was careless and, I got carried away and I had to try to cheer them all up, all those gopis, those cow herdesses. And, I didn't care about it in them, and I was just making duplicates of my body and we were dancing, but I wasn't really unfaithful. It's only Radha in my heart. And then he goes back and then they said, she's got a penitence he does, and then this and that, and then she sort of accepts him kind of suspiciously, she desperately wants to, and the poet really explains about how, but she knows she wants him to straighten out, so she doesn't mess around. And then there is a great moment where, because everybody from the Bhagavatam side has been having, everybody loves Krishna. Everybody's soul is a girlfriend of Krishna, and they want Krishna to come and be their lover and all this. And then, however, Krishna, he wants Radha. And so there's this wonderful moment where he demands, she's sort of shy about it, but then she does do it. And she puts her foot on his forehead. Just he wants to show that he's truly penitent. He's not going to play any omnipotent male god games. And then so there's this great moment where she sort of playfully puts her foot on his forehead, and he's ecstatic. Finally, she forgives me that. So it's kind of a Me Too movement. It's a Me Too movement poem, that they finally get to with Krishna, with Radha. But a lot of the Vrindavan, Bhagavatam, Hare Krishna people, they kind of don't like that. That's a little too sexy for them. Mm-hmm. It's a little too hot, on the low, like that sort of thing. They get a little bit nervous about it. But it is a huge achievement of the Indian culture, and in history, the Westerners and the Brits, they tell not only Buddhism, but they also tell that Hinduism is a big process of decay, and actually I had one grad student who found this out, wasn't me. They used the Gibbon story about the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, and they project that on every place they conquer.
Yes.
And they say that India got declined. Okay, yeah, they were pretty, India, yeah, they had their battleships, they had their war elephants, and they beat the crap out of Alexander the Great, the Greek guy, but they can't do us, and also they got what they deserved because they stopped being really militarily powerful, and they started having like tantra, and a little sensuality, and those girls, all those topless girls, and carrying jars of water on their heads, and Krishna and Radha, and God was a lover boy, even like that's all those sensuous Asian people, and so then they got destroyed, and they got the Muslims conquered them, and that's of course Muslims are the worst because they're the post-Christians in the West, and they didn't realize Jesus is God, and that's enough. We don't need any more God, and so then they came and conquered them. So we have every right to do a white man's burden and fix them up. So it's a bunch of BS. The fact is that India was peaceful and vulnerable because they were happier, and there was a Me Too movement right there in Krishna. And Vishnu was having a Me Too movement right there. Gita Govinda was a Me Too movement. Radha rules. You should see. I'm always teasing Krishna.
He was like hopelessly,
Oh, Krishna said, "Oh, please, I'm so sorry. All those gopis, they just were after me." And she's like, yeah, but you really, don't talk to me. There's a lot of stuff, and most beautiful Sanskrit poetry. Most fantastic, Really, it's great. It's really great. And it happens with Shiva and Uma too, in the Kumara Sambhava.
Yeah.
Uma takes charge. The gods are trying to stop Shiva meditating. He's going to burn down the universe with his intense yogic heat. And they can't do anything. And the god of passion comes, tries to shoot him. And then Shiva just opens his third eye and incinerates Cupid, like, forget Cupid. And then she goes, and she's okay, and she meditates nearby on another mountain, more ascetical than him. And then he gets really interested. Who's this beautiful girl sitting there? Oh, she's the next life of my former wife that I'm mad about. Oh, okay. And then he has to woo her, and then they have all this. They have this huge love affair on every mountain they can find in Eurasia, and it's all described really very lustily. And by the end, there's that wonderful poem that is like your New Year's poem. 4th of July poem, where the Shesha, which is named, right, the snake in Shiva's hair, like Vishnu's pillow snake, right? He has one in his hair, so isn't it Shesha? And he has this big snake in his hair. And Shesha, may the happiness of Shesha be a blessing for you. When Skanda, one of the other sons of Shiva and Uma, explains to him when he's complaining that Uma and Shiva play dice, and Uma always wins. And they're playing strip dice. And so she makes Shiva take off the snake in his hair, because who wants to make love with some, even if he's a god, he's got some snake in his hair. It's like really, funky, it's way too funky. And so she makes him take off everything, but she always wins at dice. And then the snake is complaining because it's chilly. He's not near Shiva's third eye. He's not near Shiva's third eye, and it's kind of cold because they're always up in the mountains. And then the other kids who, Ganesha is there and Skanda, the two of them.
Skanda is the god of war.
Well, yeah, the god of war.
And Ganesha is the comedian.
Right, and he says to Shesha, he says, look, you don't have to be in his hair. That flame coming out of his eye just shoots out there all the time. Just go down the road and you find a place where it's near this road, and then curl up near it and sort of warm your hands. That's what we do. We in Ganesha, we stand. And I always have that, like 3 bums in a garbage can, burning some garbage in there, and the trash fire in the winter, and they're warming their hands to that. And so the cosmic serpent gets relief and pleasure by being taught by Shiva's other kids how to warm himself at the cosmic fire coming out of Shiva's third eye, while Shiva and Uma are making love someplace, and never mind, the heat is still there. And so he feels relief. And so, but what it is, it's the domestication of Shiva, by whom I like taking over. And that shows the positive movement in India. And all these jerk Fox News, like Brahmins and British, they think, a bunch of original Fox Newsers, they think that when the women are powerful, then everything is going to the dogs. And they're really wrong. So anyway, but we can't get worried about fitting the story. I think it just won't work. So never mind. Arjuna just sends his robots out, and they all destroy everybody and everything. And then Vyasa makes the fact that it's not successful. Actually, the whole logic about why you should fight is wrong logic.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. So the real story comes out that this fake thing that you're going to fight and save your family from the evil bad guys. Every family gets killed. The whole thing is Kali Yuga.
Yeah.
That's the Vyasa makes them. This is like
In the very end, Yudhishthira is the only one left.
Mhm.
It's Arjuna's big brother. I told the story already. That's when he refuses to go to heaven without his
I
dog.
know.
And that's a huge thing in
He doesn't
Hindu
go to
culture.
heaven because he's Yiddish, and he goes to Jerusalem instead.
He goes with his dog.
First by way of Egypt.
Yeah.
Happy New Year. No, happy 4th of July. You know that it's possible to fix the past. Don't think the past is sort of sitting there the way it is. You can also change the past. That's part of the inconceivable liberation. No, really. That's my retroactive enlightenment idea. You can fix the past. Don't think it's, a terrible thing happened. You can't change the past. That's nonsense. Everything changes, including the past. Past is only there it's our construct also, the past. Look at Krishna. He just eats it all up.
Yeah. Where is it now?
And what?
Where is the past now?
The past?
Where is it?
It's in our memories.
Yeah.
But that's also here, embedded in us, and therefore we can change it. We can learn to change it.
Yeah.
You ask what to do with the human life. Be happy. You know the guy who made the movie called 7 Years in Tibet, Jean-Jacques Annaud? He made that movie, he told me, because he opened a book by the Dalai Lama. And he'd been wondering why was he living? He's French, they're France and existentialism and left bank and whatever. He's an artist and a brilliant man, a wonderful man. And he said he opened his book, and on the first page he said, well, purpose of life is to be happy. He says, what? A religious leader thinks that we're supposed to be happy? He was so flipped out. He spent like 3 years making a movie about Tibet. Because everybody tells you you're supposed to be miserable.
Tomorrow's lecture.
And you're realistic and all terrible things have happened. And therefore they're going to happen again. There's nothing you can do about it. Just go kill everybody. It's okay.
Yeah, they're dead anyway. They're already dead.
That's right, they're already dead. But the point is, they don't die. In India, nobody dies. They don't die because they get reborn. Nobody stays dead. Death is the moment where the subtle body and mind, the soul body and the soul mind, because even the soul has a body, super subtle, separate from the coarse body. And it's just, it's like death. So nobody stays dead. There's no state of death, in other words. It's just a moment of transition. It's like you walk through that door, there's no time when you're in the door. When are you in the door? When your toe first gets there? When the middle of your body is there? Nobody's ever in the door. But you just go through the door. Right? That's common sense. I'm sorry to have this outburst at this time. It's just, I had an email that I have to go pick up the dogs. Because they were left here and there, and it's too late, and I shouldn't try to go to the other person. All the Radhas and the Gopals of my life just sent me a bunch of orders. So I'm ready to do it, but I'm just saying that it's the 4th of July, and we should be proud to be Americans, even if we have a Russian stooge in the White House at the moment. doing, I call it the Crimean candidate, not the Manchurian candidate, the Crimean candidate. And he's just doing Putin's job. It doesn't matter, he didn't make a phone call. He's been getting hundreds of millions of dollars of loans since the 1980s from the Russian oligarchs. And so don't even think twice about it. You don't need Robert Mueller or anything. All you need is common sense. Just alienating us all from all our allies, making everybody pissed off, wrecking our own economy. What a perfect job. No wonder they drank, the Kremlin was floating in champagne when they won the election. Floating in